Many employers are finding ways to reduce stress and retain employees during these difficult times. Today, I talk one-on-one with Krejci-Shaw, the founder of Intermediate Planning, a mindful consultancy, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
Krejci-Shaw, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I appreciate it greatly. You are the founder of Intermediate Planning, which is a mindful consultancy that helps leaders find better, more ethical, non-discriminatorily ways of doing things for the vulnerable and misunderstood. Let me ask you, what's new, what's now with your business right now?
Well, right now, I feel Intermediate has really reached a really great moment. We're almost 8 years in at this point. And right now, I feel as though Intermediate has really been established as a company that is trustworthy, that is advocating for qualitative research, and also sort of setting new standards for narrative data, which is experiential data that we can receive from others about the experiences that they've had.
So what are the new standards you're currently looking at?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Yeah, what current standards are you looking at right now?
Well, in terms of data and research and qualitative data, really the standard for that is just making sure that you're as accurate as possible. It also takes study to understand how to actually not only assess narrative, but how to get that narrative ethically. So really much of the work of Intermediate focuses on stakeholder analysis and stakeholder outreach, which I say is the most important part of not just nonprofit work, but also work even in for-profit companies.
So what stakeholders are you currently involved with?
Well, it really depends on the context of what we're referring to. So in terms of stakeholders, for me, it could be, my clients, it could be obviously the people who support Intermediate and work alongside me. For clients of ours, usually stakeholders can be a workforce or it can be a team that's been, put together to achieve some specific purpose. But typically what I would say is for Intermediate, from our lens, we're always working for the beneficiary, the person or the group that's on the other side of an intervention or work process. So for us, the stakeholder, the most important stakeholder is always the beneficiary.
Yes, ma'am. So I want to get back to that in just a second, but you talk about 8 years. So what is the biggest difference between 8 years ago and right now when you think of Intermediate?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a big question. Well, I'll say this. When I first entered this work, I think purely out of necessity, because there just weren't a lot of places where I felt my skill set was well suited. And so I saw that there was also a gap between what I call decision makers and also people on the other side of decision making, which are beneficiaries, constituencies, and so forth. So I feel that Intermediate has really been a part of changing the conversation and elevating it to say that, first of all, experiential data is very, very important. It's absolutely critical. It's just as important as numbers, because numbers tell us what, but they don't tell us how or why, right? And I can see that there's been this really beautiful trend and sort of difference in even the dialogue that I hear, even when I'm out and about, business or otherwise, where this kind of data is getting more attention, the attention it deserves, really.
Yes, ma'am. So exactly what are those gaps that you're currently looking at?
Well, gaps, there's always going to be, I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about qualitative data and the value it has. And so I feel that part of Intermediate's job and anyone who's working with us at the time on a particular project, that everyone have an understanding about its value, which is why I try to focus so much on educating clients and even other people who might come to Intermediate looking for help. I try to educate them about understanding the value of data, not just numbers, but again, experiences.
Yes, ma'am. So who are those leaders that actually need your help right now?
So, there's one thing I'm also very proud of when it comes to Intermediate is the range of leadership that we can work with. So, there's leaders that have, a ton of resources. And then there's also leaders who are somehow just as effective, but maybe don't have as much. And so we work with, philanthropists to grassroots organizations. One organization that I'm really excited about working with is Fresh Future Farm.
Yeah.
Say that a few times. Yeah, Fresh Future Farm. And so, yes, and they're a wonderful organization who's doing amazing work, going back to ancestral sort of farming practices and doing an awesome job at sort of spreading the word about the value of that in our community. So that's just one organization that I'm working with. I'm really, really excited about.
And you talk about communities, and I know this is probably something that your organization also deals with, and that is workplace stress. That is, what communities are currently vulnerable to that?
Well, maybe pre-pandemic, my answer probably would have been a little bit different. I think now that we've gone through COVID, I would say that I think stress was always there, but of course it was really amplified by the fact that there was this contagion sort of floating around. Still is, it's not gone, but we've managed to find, I think, our own level of comfort in terms of the collective and how to sort of live with it. I think that right now, what's causing stress in the workplace, it's not just employees, but I think it's employers who are having to adapt to sort of new demands of a workforce who can sort of call their own shots. People want to work and be employed, but they're not willing to sort of, kill themselves for it. I mean, people are much more aware of stress and wanting to use their lives in meaningful ways and not just sort of tied to the workplace. So, yeah, I think that's causing a little bit of angst among employers right now.
And you talk about that, those new demands, I should say. So what are those hidden demands that you're dealing with right now with your company and those, obviously clients?
Well, the good thing is, I think with Intermediate, what I found is that because we have such amazing relationships with the leaders who come to us and who we unite with, there's not really anything hidden at all. It's very transparent, and I think that's really the only way that I can work, and that's really the only way I think Intermediate does as well as it does, is because it's really predicated on having really solid relationships. But I will say one common issue that I have also come across in even focus groups, I've done quite a few of those in the past couple of years, there's a childcare crisis out there. I've experienced it myself, and there's also sort of this management sort of crisis going on with a lot of employees, people who are not just working one job but are working multiple jobs, and who have children who have different, who are at different ages, and so there's a lot of stress sort of associated with commutes. I have to be here at this time, but I can't be late for my job, and it's a lot to manage. So I find that seems to be a newer or emerging narrative that's come out of the pandemic. I saw it first and heard about it first during the pandemic when I was doing focus groups, but this seems to be a common trend.
Yes, ma'am. So what narratives do you see coming next?
Well, that's sort of hard to say. I will say I don't necessarily search for the narrative necessarily. Usually narrative work is done once there's a client relationship in place, or I would say there's been a need that's been established. So sometimes it's not just a client relationship. It's someone comes to you from the community who has an organization, or they're trying to achieve a very specific task, and there's a story there, and then the whole point is to try to figure out, well, what's the story, and how can we sort of navigate closer to your goals and objectives so that you can meet the needs of the people that you want to influence and help. And so I would say that you really have to let narrative, in the context of research, a narrative always comes to you, right? But of course, there's another way of looking at it, which is societal narrative. There's national narrative. There's cultural narrative. So there's lots of narratives out there. In this case, in terms of research, it's always better to let that sort of surface on its own. The job of the researcher is to be able to discern and sort of bring that out so that it can be understood to other people who can benefit from the information.
So what goals and objectives are you currently working on to, obviously meet your clients' needs?
Well, my only goal really is always to have value. So I always want to be valuable to, anyone who, comes to Intermediate, has a need and is looking for some support. I always want to be valuable to whoever that group is or person. But ultimately, on a personal level, I would like to see more opportunities for qualitative research to sort of, I imagine that we can bring more youth into the fold of research, because research is very empowering. It is a great skill set, not just in academia, but also in life. And I think teaching young people how to deconstruct situations and problems, needs, I think is a very useful skill set. So right now I'm just trying to see if I can sort of position qualitative research with some youth groups at this point.
And what other groups do you want to be able to do, obviously use for that particular research?
Hmm. So what, maybe the question is like, what's the most ideal group, or?
Tell me what's your target audience.
Well, the word audience, I'm not quite sure is what I would say. It's if I had to sort of describe the most ideal group, I think research methods, even though that might sound outrageous to some people, like, well, how could research, how could that be sort of pieced together as an intervention to help young people? I see it perfectly in my mind, but I mostly see it being most beneficial to youth who are having trouble. I mean, the kind of young people who are struggling in school. Usually these are really bright children, and there's not quite an outlet that's customized for their intelligence, if you will. And so they're kind of, they're struggling in the public school system. And so I think that there is an opportunity to introduce like some programming around research, especially when it comes to research for social change in one's community. I think that might be worth trying. I'm certainly trying to do it, and I think it would be beneficial. So I guess that would be the target at this point.
Well, let me move on because we're running out of time, actually. But I want to go back, obviously, to workforce stress that's going on right now. What's the effects of burnout, obviously, on business performance?
That is hard to say because, again, so much has changed in the last couple of years in terms of even, I think, what is considered to be valuable. The times have changed. People are not working the same hours that they used to. And so in terms of quantifying someone's work output, that's a little bit skewed at this point. I think ultimately the biggest change has just been accommodation, having to accommodate the needs of employees who need flexibility. That's the biggest important factor that I think we have to consider is flexibility. There has to be flexibility for people, I think, to even be effective. Because at this point, burnout, I don't know exactly how that would look. I mean, it would look differently across, industry, right? But ultimately, maybe burnout at this point is even, stopping going through or quitting the traditional work week and starting something on one's own. I think that's also a trend that we've seen. Many people are going into the marketplace and they're saying, hey, I can, maybe I can cook something, or maybe I can make something, and perhaps I can turn that into, a business, and maybe I can live off that. Well, maybe that's better than having to sort of be, sort of locked into the work demands or needs of an employer. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I'm seeing.
Well, let me ask you this, Dan. What percentage of people like that are here in Charleston that you've actually dealt with?
Oh my goodness. Well, percentage-wise, I'm not sure. And what's interesting, this question came up. So yesterday, I had the pleasure of observing students who are presenting tonight at CFC, who are part of the Impact X program. Sure. And and I don't want to say too much because they're not presenting officially yet. They're doing that later this evening.
Right.
But I will say that there was this really great question that came up about, well, what is the percentage of, say, merchants out there who are, doing, pop up this and pop up that, and are selling or providing services? What are the numbers? And the big question mark, and there were other business people there who were helping give feedback. Everyone was kind of shrugged their shoulders, and I made the point to say, I don't think there's been enough data on that. That's a quantitative project that I think is definitely worth exploring, because we don't really know those numbers. The trends, the whole gig economy it's not new, but there's definitely been an upswing. And so I just don't think that we have, much. I don't think we have many reliable numbers to talk about that yet.
How does actually excessive stress dull creative abilities?
Say that one more time.
Yes, ma'am. How does excessive stress, that is, dull creative activities and abilities?
So, definitely concentration. There seems to, in the experiences that I've had speaking with folks who are struggling in the workforce, there is a lot of heartache around like sort of these split responsibilities. Because many working class people are pulled in so many different directions. Again, many families and parents are not working one job; they're working 2 or 3.
Sure.
And oftentimes those jobs can be at strange hours, and trying to balance, that with, say, making sure your children are taken care of and they're in, safe hands and with responsible people. That is, that's taking a toll, I feel, on many, many parents. And again, as somebody who works independently, I definitely understand that. I've gone through that myself. But what's also very painful to see is when parents don't have as many resources, and so there's just always this push and pull and this tugging between like these responsibilities and loyalties, like being there for your children, but then also making sure that materially that you're taking care of your kids as well. It's tough.
Yes, ma'am. So I know you do a lot of research, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but do you know how much stress is costing you the average United States employer as far as absenteeism?
In terms of absenteeism, no, that's not a statistic that I necessarily know or have had a reason necessarily to look into. Again, for a company like Intermediate, we're far more focused on, we have very personal relationships with people that we work with, and so it's very customized and very context specific. So for us, instead of, say, understanding like absenteeism, we wouldn't look at the number necessarily, right? We might look at it if that information is available or we can get it, of course, but we'd be more interested as to why there's absenteeism, and looking at sort of the adverse impact of that. Well, what is it? How is it disrupting, or how is it impeding progress or advancement in your workplace? So we would answer the question or know something about absenteeism, but more so the how and the why it's happening, and then of course the impact.
What will that impact be the next 5 to 10 years?
Who's to say? Like, I remember when I first got into graduate school, we were talking about how strategic plans, they used to be for 10 years for companies and nonprofits, and I think some were even as long as 20 years.
Right.
Now it's like 24 months, 36 months, because the world's just, everything's changing so quickly, so fast, and so it's really hard to figure out, or make a prediction about what that might look like. What I hope is that we see more entrepreneurs out there who are contributing to the world, earning money, earning a living, but also sort of fulfilling their dreams. I'd love to see more of that, and I think that we are on that trajectory. I think that we're seeing more people take ownership of their time and their talents, and they're also doing a lot of really good work in the world, contributing in a way that makes sense for them.
Ashley Shaw with Intermediate Planning. Thank you for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's really great to talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you.